Welcome back to another episode of the Pax What She Said podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Maggie Loney, joined as always by Perri Goldstein. And some news dropped, of course, right before we hit record. So we can talk about the Pro Bowl a little bit. We'll talk about Jaire Alexander. But this is really just a Packers-Bears preview and a look ahead to the postseason. Obviously, we know the Packers have clinched. They're in the playoffs. Where they are seeding and who they're playing will shake out on Sunday. So some really good football coming up this weekend. Maybe not the Packers-Bears game, depending on how you look at it, but at least some football with some implications coming up here down the stretch to close out the regular season. I can't believe we're already in week 18.
I know, that's what I was going to start with, which was how have we made it to the end of the season already? That's wild. It always goes by way too fast. It always somehow sneaks up that it's January. But luckily, this will not be your final preview show. The Packers will be playing more football after week 18. So we will have that to discuss. But once again, the Packers end their season with the Bears.
Yeah, second straight season that they play at Minnesota, then come home to Lambeau Field to host the Bears for that Week 18 matchup. And obviously, we know that that leaves the Vikings and the Lions to play. They are flexed to Sunday Night Football. Really, really good game there. So let's dive into the playoff picture, right? We know that one of those two teams is going to win the NFC North. They're going to win the division. They're going to win the number one seed. They're going to get home field advantage throughout the playoffs. The loser travels all the way down to seed 5 and is traveling for the rest of potentially the playoffs unless they host a lower seed at some point. But really big implications in that one, obviously, to go from home field throughout to earning that bye to get some rest and then having to play next weekend. So not sure, your take on it. We on Pack-A-Day were joking about trying to find a silver lining for both teams, and I don't think there is one. It just kind of sucks that both of your NFC North rivals are the two teams contending for such a coveted top seed and position.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. I think it's a little more, I think the Lions are a little bit more on the downswing to me. Like, it feels like the Vikings are the ones heating up. If I was a Lions fan or a Lions player, I'd be pretty upset that I didn't have the 1 seed locked up already, just given the way that their regular season has gone. So the fact that they could lose that after the season that they've had is pretty insane, but also a testament to how good the division is and how good the conference is. I'm glad the game was flexed out to Sunday Night Football. That is easily, like, by a mile, the best game of the weekend and probably the only, like, actually important one of the weekend, considering the AFC is pretty set at the moment, other than the teams that are in the hunt. So yeah, no, there's no silver lining other than the two NFC North rivals will be going head to head and beating each other up before a very important stretch. Not saying I'm wishing injury, just like it's going to be a really intense, really gritty matchup that is probably going to put everybody's bodies like to the test in this one. Everybody's coaching minds and strengths will be at 100. So I guess that's my only silver lining in there. But backers just have to focus on themselves and take care of business.
Yeah, so we obviously know already that the Eagles plan to sit most of their starters since they are locked into that 2 seed and they will be hosting on Wild Card Weekend. So implications for the Packers then, obviously, they no longer control their own destiny in the NFC with their loss last week to Minnesota. The Commanders are kind of in the driver's seat there. The Commanders currently the 6th seed, Packers currently the 7th seed. So if the Commanders win, even if the Packers win, nothing changes for Green Bay. They are the 7th seed and they'll travel to Philly next weekend for Wild Card Weekend. So that's pretty straightforward for the Packers. They need a little bit of help. If the Packers lose, they're also locked into the 7th seed. So really, their only lateral movement at this point is to stay at the 7th seed. If the Commanders lose on Sunday to the Cowboys, which will be happening at noon, the same time as the Packers play, the Commanders lose and the Packers win, then the Packers will get into that 6th seed. Who they're playing then is completely undecided, obviously. If they're the 7th seed, we know they're playing Philly. Options for the 3rd seed include the Rams or the Buccaneers. The Buccaneers have not clinched a playoff spot yet, which makes things a little bit more confusing. But if the Falcons win the NFC South, the Falcons can only be the 4th seed, which would take them out of contention for the Packers to play them. So, depending on, your rooting interests, I guess, for the NFC South, Buccaneers could get the 3rd seed, Falcons would only be able to get the 4th seed. Is TBD. So, depending on then, what shakes out with the number 1 overall seed, of course, whoever loses between the Vikings and the Lions could be traveling to that 4th seed on or next weekend to play potentially the Falcons, or they could be playing the Rams, or they could be playing the Buccaneers. So, a lot up in the air. We kind of know what teams are at least going to be in it for the most part, except for the South, but
know the players, we don't know the seeding. And that's what I think is really interesting about this week 18. I think it's a little, I mean, it's pretty shocking to me that at this point the Packers, at the record that they have, could be a 7th seed, that they don't control their own destiny in week 18. I don't know. I have no comment on it other than that's wild. And the fact that they would have to go play, arguably, I think the Eagles are the top team in this conference at the moment. It would be a huge test and probably disadvantage if this team wants to get past wild card weekend. Whatever happens in the middle there, it is a more advantageous matchup, not just because the Packers have beaten the Rams, but also just I think where the Bucs and the Falcons are in terms of their strengths and schedule. It feels like a more winnable game, but we will see. We will see what happens.
They'd still be vying for the 6th seed as a 12-5 team, which is just crazy to think about, the fact that you can be that good and potentially miss the playoffs. It's like, whoever loses between the Vikings and Lions would be the first 14-win team to play a wild card game, or to be in a wild card position, which is just unheard of. And I think it's really a testament to how stacked the NFC is, because the Commanders have come out of nowhere, had a really, really impressive season with Jaden Daniels. The Buccaneers, and I think when we talked earlier in the season and kind of predicted the divisions, we had the Falcons up here. So the Buccaneers have been a surprise getting into things. We thought for sure the 49ers would be in the mix and the Rams could be a wild card team. And then, of course, the 49ers were riddled with injuries and have not been able to overcome those. So just a really interesting playoff picture, but a really, really strong one in the NFC.
Yes. So we mentioned it at the top of the show, and I think before we go into the Bears preview, we should talk about the Jaire Alexander news. We received word, which is not really that surprising, that Jaire Alexander's injury is much worse than anticipated, that his PCL tear is requiring surgery, and he is now shut down for the season. In reading a bunch of the I guess like news breaks and questions from Matt LaFleur, it sounds like they really were trying to get him to go. We've seen that he's been practicing, but he ended up having a little bit too much swelling in that knee and going to get it checked out, and it got kind of arthroscopically scoped, and they determined like there's probably, I'm assuming they just said there's no way you're going to play this season. Like you might as well just shut it down and get it fixed this season. So that you have as much time as possible in off season. My question, and like this is hindsight, and I know that it's unfair, is why didn't you do this a month ago? The answer is probably because they thought he could come back and play, and if there was a chance he could come back and play, then they would prefer that. It just feels like if they had done this when it happened, maybe he had a chance to come back by now or in next week for the playoffs. And now obviously you've lost one of your best players for half the season and also for the playoffs. So I don't love the way this has been handled, to be honest, by the Packers. I don't know if there was any way to handle it differently. I think they probably made the best decisions they could given like the knowledge that they had and the fact that they were striving for Jaire to play, but now they're kind of in the worst case scenario spot.
And I think it's really reminiscent of the David Bakhtiari situation, where he was rehabbing and there was a bunch of swelling and a lot of things kind of beyond his control, but he was practicing and then some days he couldn't practice. And it gets to a point where you just have to pull the plug. And I think that's where they reached with Jaire. And it is unfortunate, obviously. It sounds like JJ McCarthy, the Vikings rookie quarterback, is going through something similar where he had surgery and there's swelling. And it's just so unpredictable with the nature of it. And hopefully, obviously, he's back to full strength next season. But missed so many games the last couple of years and has now been hampered by so many injuries that it's really hard to predict what kind of player he'll even be when he comes. And it's not a knock against him. Obviously, we know that he is an incredible talent, but I mean, injuries take their toll, right? We saw it with Eric
Yeah.
Stokes. He kind of lost a step, and he's not the caliber of player that Jaire is. We saw it with David Bakhtiari. Like these guys are really good, but the injuries just they catch up with you, and I'm not sure what kind of Jaire product we'll see when he's able to come back. So hopefully the surgery goes well and he's able to recover. I know that they optimistically said he potentially could come back for like the Super Bowl, but having not played in that many months and testing out a fresh PCL surgery, I'm not sure is potentially the move you'd want to make in the postseason. But
Mhm.
I think, there's also implications here to talk about when it comes to the rest of the secondary, because obviously the trade deadline is passed. Help is not on the way for this Packers team, right? Like this is the
Yeah.
secondary that they're going to be setting into the playoffs. So hopefully that looks like Xavier McKinney and Evan Williams deep, and then Javon Bullard in the slot, and then Nixon and Carrington Valentine on the boundaries.
Yeah.
I was kind of surprised going back through the notes from the first matchup that Corey Ballantyne played as much as he did. I know he's been dealing with injury, but he, I think, was taking some snaps away from Eric Stokes initially the first time the Packers and Bears met. So we'll see if he gets healthy, what he looks like. Robert Rochelle obviously is still on the roster as a core special teamer. So unsure how a lot of this shakes out, but hopefully you have your best five available down the stretch because we know they've been dealing with some pretty significant injuries.
Yeah, Evan Williams has the quad still, but hopefully that's not too significant. I think that's really the linchpin here because I was thinking about it in terms of, well, it's not like this Jaire injury happened this past week in the Vikings game. The Packers have been relying on him all season, and now they have to adjust to not having him. They've had to make adjustments for weeks. So we've watched the secondary play. We know what to expect. They've been able to deploy Jeff Hafley's defense without Jaire for a while now. There's plenty of reps and um, plenty of like scheme to utilize that they've practiced well enough and won games without Jaire. So if you're looking for a silver lining in terms of like the playoffs, that's kind of where I'm at with it. It's like they haven't been relying on Jaire this whole time, so I don't know how much this is going to change. Where I start to get shaky, which is what you just said, which is there are other injuries to consider. I think if the Packers can stay healthy with those best five, if Evan Williams can play deep with McKinney, and you can keep Nixon on the boundary with it more Valentine than Stokes. I know they've still been rotating them, and have Javon Bullard play in what's seeming to be his much more natural position at nickel. They're going to do just fine because that's how they've been playing, and they've been playing well with those five. Um, it's when you start to have to move those guys around is when it starts to get a little bit dicier.
Yeah, so I think this is a good way to shift into the Packers Bears matchup this week, obviously. But the implications as well as how Hafley can kind of deploy his defense, right? We thought going into the season that he'd play a lot of single high, he'd play a lot more press man, and he simply does not have the horses to make that run at this point, right? Without Jaire, a lot of your press man kind of goes out the window. So we've seen a lot more soft zone, and that is challenging against, of course, offenses that include the likes of Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Devontae Smith, AJ Brown, uh, Puka Nakua, Cooper Cup, like all these guys potentially coming, Mike Evans down the stretch in the playoffs. Like there are some very, very good wide receivers here that the Packers could see as early as next week. And yes, they've been without Jaire, but then it becomes even more imperative to make sure that, hopefully Evan Williams doesn't play this week. And I say that, so that he has a full week to rest the quad. And I know
Mm.
Matt LaFleur said that they would try to be smart, with these guys and their injuries. And certainly you still want to win for a number of reasons. There's a lot at stake here, and the potential to be the 6th seed is better than being the 7th seed. But you certainly don't want to see the Packers get banged up because they're just running out of bodies in the
Yeah.
secondary, and it would be really tough for them to overcome that. And I think that's why I was trying to segue into this is that the Bears do have their offense is not graded out very well. They're not scoring a ton of points, but they still have DJ Moore. They have Roma Dunze. They have Keenan Allen. Like they have pieces for this Packers defense to account for. So might be a little short staffed here in the secondary on Sunday, even against a struggling Bears offense.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like they look the Vikings were obviously able to pass against them. I think they have a higher caliber and a plethora of weapons than the Bears do, and the Packers were still without Alvin Williams. I think able to hold the Vikings passing game with the major players to an okay spot. So I actually feel okay against the Bears. Um, with who they have going. They're not going to have to, double bracket a Justin Jefferson type in this game. I think they can play a little bit more individually and have clearer assignments. Because in the Vikings game, when you have both Justin Jefferson and a Jordan Addison, you could see that they were like, but I have to, and then right, and then there were open holes for the rest of the Vikings pass catchers. That's not going to be something that they have to deal with in this Bears game. It's going to be very like clear cut who they have to cover. I'm actually a little bit more worried about what happened the last time, which is them not keeping contain and Caleb Williams running all over the place. The Packers front, I think, looks better than they did the first time they played, but it's still not their strength at all. There were also some really weird packages out there during interesting downs. Like you had Colby Wooden and Carl Brooks, and not your starters, like no Rashawn Gary, no Devontae Wyatt, no Kenny Clark on some like key downs that I thought was really interesting. So I'm curious to see what the personnel looks like, knowing that the Bears are probably going to want to run Caleb Williams because it worked so well last time.
Yeah, and I mean, I think certainly we're recording this Thursday before the injury report is out for Thursday. But Zane Anderson in concussion protocol did not practice, so he's another piece in your secondary. Was a starter obviously a couple weeks ago. Javon Bullard is limited, but we expect him to play since he played last week. Evan Williams is still a DNP, and then Devontae Wyatt, who was also in concussion protocol, is practicing in full at least, so they could have him back. To your point about generating pressure and again, I mean, this is a really, really bad Bears offensive line. And the Packers got 3 sacks last time, but Caleb Williams had 70 yards on 9 rushing attempts. And again, not to keep, I don't want to look too far ahead, but Philly has one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. So this is your opportunity to set the stage and tee off against a bad offensive line to kind of prepare you for the better rushing attacks and the better offensive lines that you're going to see if you want to get anywhere in the playoffs. So I agree with you. I thought the last game was really interesting. Caleb Williams had 231 yards, 23 passes. He moved pretty well. Didn't throw for a touchdown or a pick, but got everything done with his legs. So that's going to be, I think, the focal point for this Packers defense is containing him because, again, looking ahead, you could have Jalen Hurts next week if he's out of the protocol at that point too. So
Yeah.
it's a team that they should beat up on, and
Yeah.
they need to.
Yeah, and I feel like we've been saying that a little bit, like waiting for this pass rush to kind of tee off. And they've had games where, right, they've had 5, 6, 7 sacks. So they're perfectly capable. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to look at this game as like at all meaningful, even though the Packers have to win. Because you're also thinking about like, I'm thinking about, I want them to stay healthy. I don't want them to do too much. I think it's perfectly reasonable that they beat the Bears, especially at home, especially again when this game means something. But containing Caleb will be like the start, and then everything will flow from there. I think that was the only piece of the last win that led to it being like way, way too close at the end.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, special teams kind of sealed the deal for the Packers there,
Yeah.
to win that one by a single point, and then the Bears have just, unfortunately for them, they've been imploding. Obviously, let go of Matt Eberflus already. Thomas Brown is their interim head coach, who had to fill in as offensive coordinator and then step in as interim head coach, all in his first season with the team. But it's a tough time to be a Bears fan at this point. They're kind of trending in the wrong direction. We're really optimistic about the kind of the direction that they were heading with their new quarterback. Thought they had some really nice pieces on offense. And now they're
Mm.
skidding into a position where they could set the longest losing streak in one consecutive regular season in NFL history. They've lost 10 straight. If they lose to the Packers on Sunday, 11 straight losses would be the most losses in one season in their
Yikes.
franchise. Their
That's
longest streak
nice.
is 14 games between 2022 and 2023, but this would be the longest in one singular season. So not great for the Bears. On the flip side of that, the Packers have won 11 straight. Matt LaFleur has never lost to the Bears. They've gone 11-0, which is the longest streak by any NFL team against a single opponent. The Packers have that going for them. And it's at Lambeau. So again, you really want to see
Yeah.
them dominate this game
Yeah.
and kind of put everything together. The last thing I want your take on really quick before we maybe shout out the Pro Bowl and then wrap this thing up is the red zone. The Packers have been playing really well in the red zone. The Bears have one of the best red zone defenses still in the league. They're, I think, third, giving up a touchdown like 46% of the time. The Packers coming out of the bye are 75% success rate in the red zone. So it really feels like they've picked things up. They're currently ninth on offense. So that includes obviously the games post or pre-bye as well. But anything you feel like you want to see the Packers clean up before the postseason? Anything you want to see them fix?
Yeah. I'd like to see less drops.
Fair. Okay.
I'd like to see the Packers like get into a rhythm early, even if things go wrong. I
Yes.
think like one, it can be the fumble, which is obviously a huge mistake, but a bad penalty that backs them up, like things like that. Just they derail their ability to get into a rhythm, and it doesn't last. It's not just one drive. It happens. It takes them a while to get back, even a full half. The Bears defense is very good. It's very solid and stout, and it can certainly do enough to make stops. They're not nearly as good as the Vikings, obviously. So I fully expect the Packers to be able to move the ball against them, but being able to bounce back much quicker if anything were to happen and upset their rhythm on offense, like needs to happen. The other thing I'd say is just, and this is a Matt thing, and I don't know if there's any way to change this because he's been doing this since he started, and I think it's just, nobody's perfect. It's a Matt LaFleur flaw, but like stop getting away from things that work.
Yeah.
You and I talked about this in our recap video, and I keep thinking about it is, you're backed up, you're at like the 11, 12 yard line, and it's 3 pass plays all drop, like you don't get a first down or there were drops and then you're punting, and it's like Josh Jacobs question mark on any of those maybe, or it's 3rd and 5 and you're kind of around midfield and shot play 40 yards, and I just wish that there would be choices in certain situations that were a little bit more advantageous to just moving the sticks instead of trying to make a big play. So those are my main ones that I'm looking at.
Yeah, and of course, we talked about it. The offense does operate differently when Christian Watson's not out there. He is not practicing again, so hopefully he'd be able to come back for Wild Card Weekend because that makes a big difference as well. But getting out of this one healthy is the main priority. Really quickly, just acknowledge guys that made Pro Bowl voting came out this morning. 3 Packers are on that first team. Josh Jacobs, deservedly so, obviously. Xavier McKinney, deservedly so. And then Rashawn Gary made the Pro Bowl list as well, which mildly surprising, but shout out to Rashawn. That's great. And then the Packers have 7 alternates, which is really impressive. Elton Jenkins, Jordan Love, Kenny Clark, Keyshawn Nixon as a return specialist, Tucker Kraft, Josh Myers, and Jaire Alexander. So maybe head scratch in there, depending on some injuries and the length that some of these guys have played this season. But yeah, shout out to all the Packers that made the Pro Bowl. Very exciting. I think some of them have incentives, and I think it's also Xavier McKinney's first Pro Bowl, so very cool that he gets to come to Green Bay. and do that. Yep.
Wow. Wow. Well,
Um,
he deserves it. I mean, he's going to be all pro, first team all pro this season. So, as he should be. Cool. 10. That
and
feels like more than ever in a while.
it feels like a lot, but can't leave without a score prediction. So let's go ahead and wrap this baby up and talk about Packers Bears Sunday at noon. What do you got?
Yeah, this one comes down to injuries for me. Like, if the Packers can get, a few pieces back, I can see this being like a 31-17, 31-13, like pretty handed, solid win. If they're missing some key pieces and if the Bears are trying to play spoiler for the Packers seeding, like a much potentially closer game, but I still think the Packers put up 30. I'd like to see it be dominant, but to be honest with you, I don't know that they just need the win.
Yeah, I'm feeling similarly. I think that they have all the potential in the world to put up 30. Certainly left points on the board last week in Minnesota as well, but 24-14-ish feels right to
Yeah.
me, 24-10. Like, I just think it's going to be cold. The Bears are a really dejected football team right now, and obviously they want to come in and stop the losing streak. They want to end the season on a high note. They want to, like you said, play spoiler for the Packers, because if the Bears win, there's nothing the Packers can do. They're traveling to Philly next weekend for Wild Card Weekend, so certainly a lot on the line for them. But yeah, I think the focus here is get really healthy and clean up some of your mistakes that you made. So we'll see. It should be, it's Packers football, right? So we're always going to enjoy it, even if it's not going to be potentially the most fun game of the season. But keep an eye on the other scoreboards while the Packer game is playing, and we'll see where the Packers shake out in the standings. And then we'll have a wild card preview coming out here pretty soon, which is just crazy to think about. That we're already going to be talking about postseason football, but that's all we got.
Yeah.
That's all we got. Thank you as always for listening. You can find us on Twitter and on Blue Sky at PWSS Podcast and at Pax What She Said, Perri at Perri_Goldstein, me at Maggie J. Loney. If you don't follow the podcast on YouTube already, please like and subscribe. We really appreciate that. Or if you're listening on Spotify, be a supporter of the show if you like what we're doing. We appreciate that as well. But we'll be back, and next time we talk, we'll be talking about playoff football, which is incredibly exciting. And go Pack, go.
Go Pack, go.